A man was fishing when he suddenly noticed a dazzling golden glimmer appearing far away on the white frozen lake. Curious, he grabbed his ice pick and walked toward it. On closer look, he saw a right hand frozen in the ice, and that golden glimmer came from a ring on one of its fingers. Having served on the battlefield, Harlan wasn't easily scared, so he simply began to chip away at the ice. Because the weather had already warmed up, the surface broke easily, and soon a corpse floated to the top. Before he could even process what was happening, he spotted a black suitcase not far away. The lake was usually deserted and ice fishing had recently been banned due to thawing, so Harlan pried open the case without much hesitation. Then he saw a sight that made his heart race. A whole chest filled with cash, estimated to be at least $1 million. Through the hole in the ice, he even saw a plane underwater, which meant there had to be more cases like this one. Back in his cave, Harlan felt lost, unsure what to do with the cash. But what he didn't know was that when he broke the lock, he had already triggered the hidden tracking device. Months earlier, a man had walked into a pawn shop and started carefully observing his surroundings. When it was his turn to sell, he placed a pocket watch into a slot under the counter. Its medieval design was common, and it looked like a replica, but soon the owner sensed something wrong. There was a faint ticking sound coming from inside. Meanwhile, Drake was already hiding beneath the counter. This group was clearly well-trained, not ordinary petty thieves, and their goal was obviously not this small pawn shop. They reached the staircase in the back, secured their ropes, and slid down into the basement. It turned out this was the biggest smuggling factory in the whole city, hidden right beneath the pawn shop, and today happened to be cash transfer day. The terrified manager insisted the money had already been sent to headquarters, with only a little left behind. Drake didn't believe a word, shot off one of the man's ears, then the other. By now the manager knew there was no escaping alive. To avoid further pain, he confessed and opened a secret chamber behind the cabinet. Inside, the gang found piles upon piles of cash, over $20 million. As they prepared to leave, Drake wanted to eliminate the witnesses, but his partner stopped him. Yet moments later, once his partner walked out, Drake pulled the pin on a grenade, clearly unwilling to let anyone live. Not long after, the robbers prepared to move the cash, and the mastermind showed up at that moment. Their victim had powerful connections. According to their plan, the cash would be flown out by plane, and each of them would leave separately to avoid being followed before regrouping to split the money. Everything had gone perfectly according to plan from the very beginning, but an accident occurred at the very end. No one expected that the plane would be struck by lightning and crash, causing the money to vanish without a trace, until the poacher Harlan stumbled upon it by accident, reactivating the signal. Soon, the team split into two groups and headed toward the crash site. Rhodes tried to get a local ranger to guide them since the thawing ice made the trip dangerous, but the officer in charge, Ani, wasn't cooperative at all. Even with Sheriff Raleigh vouching for him, she refused to help. Ani couldn't just ignore people showing up like that, so she grabbed her car lock, ready to confront them head-on. Not wanting to cause a scene or attract attention, Rhodes and his men reluctantly backed off. Meanwhile, Drake tracked down the last crew member, Penn. In the past 6 months, Penn had found faith in God, become a preacher, and wanted to turn over a new leaf. He didn't even want a share of the money. But would things really turn out as simple as he thought? If you refused the money, it meant you weren't one of them, maybe even a threat. Besides, this was Penn's hometown, and having him on their side would make things easier. In the end, Penn was forced back into the crew under Drake's half-hearted threats. Elsewhere, a villager's truck got stuck on the frozen lake, so Annie went out to assist. While helping tow the vehicle, she spotted Harlan. Since he was ice fishing without a permit, it was technically illegal. When she searched his gear, she found the cash. Harlan couldn't explain where the money came from, so Annie decided to give him a full inspection. Since it didn't belong to him and he hadn't spent a cent, Harlan didn't resist and was tied up. Annie loaded the money and his bag into her vehicle, then called Raleigh, saying she had caught a poacher. At first, Raleigh didn't think much of it. Catching fish wasn't exactly a big crime. But when Annie mentioned the suitcase full of cash, he realized how serious the situation was. Right then, Jed noticed a car approaching fast, heading straight for them. As soon as the stranger stepped out, Annie felt a chill of unease. And just as she expected, before they could even exchange a few words, Drake pulled out his weapon.
Get on your knees. Thought you said no violence, man.
There is no violence. Search the truck.
Let's just get the money and
search the truck.
Soon, Penn found the money on the truck, but the amount was clearly off. At the same time, Ani looked completely confused, not knowing what was going on. But to Drake, that expression only meant she was pretending. After Jed's death, Annie tried to get in the truck and leave, but the tow rope kept her from starting it. Luckily, at that critical moment, Harlan rushed over. Just as they were about to escape, Serena suddenly sped up and jumped onto the truck. With his hands tied, Harlan was no match for Serena. Fortunately, Serena's goal was the cash box, which gave him the chance to kick her off the truck. That case of money was clearly gone for good, and none of the other boxes had tracking devices. Now the only way to recover it was to catch Annie and Harlan. Drake immediately ordered Serena to call Dax and tell him to block the truck. Meanwhile, Harlan revealed everything he knew, including the crashed plane and the remaining cash. But Annie didn't believe a word, and suspected Harlan might be one of them. So she reported everything again to Raleigh. Raleigh told her to head to the rendezvous point and wait for him and the reinforcements. However, their truck suddenly broke down and stalled on the frozen lake. Though the shore was only 2 miles away, their pursuers had vehicles, which meant they could be caught at any moment. Harlan suggested they split up, but Annie refused. She even tied them together with a rope to prevent either of them from falling through the ice. However, she also untied the restraints on Harlan's hands. With their packs on their backs, they started walking. Soon the criminals found Annie's vehicle and spotted them through binoculars. Drake immediately ordered everyone to get in and move out, but as soon as Ellis started the engine, the front wheels unexpectedly cracked through the ice. The inexperienced Ellis panicked and slammed the accelerator, only making the car sink faster. Realizing the danger, Penn immediately told Ellis not to move and quickly pulled off his belt. They stood side by side, holding on to each other, as the car sank deeper into the freezing water. Worse still, Ellis's legs got trapped by the open car door, even though he managed to grab the belt.
Don't you let go! Hang on!
Moments later, Dax arrived in a truck, and Drake ordered him to pursue the targets on a motorcycle while the rest drove around the thin ice to regroup later. By then, Annie and Harlan had reached the shore, and Harlan retrieved some weapons from his small hideout. When Dax spotted them, he saw the two working on something near the lake. Knowing they were out of bullets, he charged in without hesitation.
Ready to run.
Although he slipped and fell, he wasn't hurt and quickly tried to grab his fallen weapon. Seeing this, Harlan drew his bow and fired. He didn't hit Dax's vital spot, but it bought him some time. The two began to fight hand-to-hand on the icy surface, but Harlan, though a veteran, hadn't trained in years and was no match for Dax. Eventually, he fell into the freezing lake. Ironically, that fall saved him from Dax's gunfire. Using the ice for cover, he suddenly reappeared and ambushed Dax. The strike wasn't fatal, and because Dax wanted information about the plane's crash site, he didn't go for the kill either. In the end, Dax bled out from a ruptured artery and died there on the ice. Not long after Harlan and Annie escaped, Drake's crew arrived and immediately found Dax's body. Serena, who was Dax's wife, went nearly insane with grief and rage, swearing revenge. They immediately set off without a pause to track down Harlan and Annie. Although Harlan was used to the freezing cold, being soaked slowed his movements. The pursuers still had some restraint left, except Serena, who fired wildly in fury while the others held back. As they entered the mountains, the terrain became rugged, but the heavy snow left clear tracks behind them. They finally waded into a stream to hide their footprints. However, Penn immediately figured out their trick. Even after Harlan and Annie swept the ground with branches after coming ashore, Penn still found the right direction. After a short chase, he suddenly shouted for everyone to stop. He recognized the marks on the ground, signs of a hunting zone, where locals set traps for brown bears. Going further could be deadly. But the others didn't believe him at all. And as he argued with Drake, disaster struck. The situation was now crystal clear. They had only taken a few steps before one of them got injured, so entering the forest was no longer an option. They had to come up with another plan. On the other side, Harlan and Ani stopped once they reached the mountain cave. Even though they knew lighting a fire could expose their location, they had no other choice. Harlan was already on the verge of collapse. They had no idea that the gang hadn't risked entering the forest either. Instead, they found a small supply cabin, broke the lock, and began bandaging Serena's wounded foot while waiting for Rhodes to arrive. After removing his wet clothes, Harlan's body temperature slowly returned to normal. During their small talk, Ani learned his story. Back when Harlan was in the army, his wife and daughter had lived in this area, but his daughter died from illness, and his wife, overwhelmed by grief, turned to forbidden substances and also lost her life. Unable to bear the pain, he came back to live in solitude.
It's the only place where I feel close to her.
Not long after, a car stopped outside the cabin. It was Rhodes who had arrived. But strangely, after entering the cabin, Rhodes didn't ask about the situation. Instead, he muttered a few words they couldn't understand. When he finally opened the handkerchief he had brought, Ellis suddenly stood up in horror. Inside were 3 severed fingers. Ellis immediately realized where they came from and dropped to his knees without hesitation. It turned out Ellis had secretly conspired with outsiders, trying to keep the stolen money for himself. But he was caught. Although his injuries didn't look too serious, there was no way to treat them out here, and no one would take him to a hospital. That made his death even more brutal. Seeing all this, Penn finally understood how naive he had been to think he could just walk away. Later that night, after drying their clothes by the fire, Annie took Harlan to meet her people. They were all indigenous locals like Ani. After a brief explanation, the tribal leader agreed to help them find a safe route out of the mountains.
See that? It's methane, explosive gas in those bubbles. Think I'll go this way. So watch your step. You stay close.
When morning came, the group returned to their temporary base. Annie used the radio to contact Raleigh. Before long, Raleigh arrived alone. But as soon as they started talking, Annie sensed something off. Raleigh seemed unusually focused on Harlan, and his answers about backup were vague. Realizing he had been exposed, Raleigh decided to tell the truth. He had taken money from the gang. Once he handed over Harlan, his job would be done. After all, the cash had nothing to do with them. No bank had been robbed, no house broken into. Why not make some easy money? But Annie, though not a cop, refused to be part of it. Too many people had already died, and there was no reason to trust these killers. Raleigh forced Ani and Harlan into the police car and drove toward the meeting point. But as they neared their destination, Harlan suddenly spoke up. Having figured everything out, he told Raleigh that only he knew where the money was hidden. Compared to the small cut they promised him, he could take the whole fortune and disappear forever. Or he could call in real reinforcements and wipe them out completely. The temptation made Raleigh hesitate only for a moment before he reached into the bag, searching for the non-existent tracker Harlan mentioned. When the car crashed, the impact wasn't hard, so neither of them was badly injured. As they kicked out the broken glass to escape, Raleigh regained his senses. But before he could make a move, a bullet struck him in the head. After all, he had already outlived his usefulness. Annie and Harlan had no weapons, and their only hope lay in the gun lying on the ground. Thinking fast, Harlan took off his jacket and tossed it to distract the attackers. So many had already died for this money. Harlan knew that whether or not he revealed the plane's location, they would never let him live. He only hoped to stall for time and think of a plan. But Rhodes gave him no chance and ordered Penn to shoot Annie. However, Penn, who had turned to faith, had already sworn never to take another life. Throughout the chase, he had acted only as a guide and never fired a single shot. He then immediately turned around and tried to walk away. But Rhodes would never allow Penn to leave like that. As Rhodes raised his weapon toward Annie, the wounded Penn pulled out a lighter. The methane trapped beneath the ice ignited instantly.
Rhodes!
And Rhodes was engulfed in flames, dying on the spot. The remaining 3 barely escaped alive. When Ani disappeared, Harlan immediately began searching for her. He soon found Drake and Annie inside a warehouse. Now Drake was the only one left in the gang, and the money had become entirely his. Harlan promised that if Drake spared Annie, he would take him to the rest of the cash, but Drake didn't believe a word.
Wait!
He's the one killing you.
Right!
Harlan had already been shot twice. Not fatal wounds, but enough to weaken him. Fortunately, since Drake hadn't gotten the money, he didn't go for the kill on Harlan. That hesitation gave Annie the chance to flip the kayak and pin Drake underneath. Harlan and Annie used the moment to escape. They hid in opposite directions. Annie made noise to draw Drake in, while Harlan sneaked up with a paddle. Drake was impaled through the throat by the wooden pole and kicked into the freezing lake. The ruthless gang never imagined they would all perish at the hands of a ranger and a poacher. In the end, Harlan recovered the money, but only handed part of it over to the authorities. The rest he gave to the indigenous people. As for whether he kept any for himself, no one knows.